are learning about a man named Jacob. Can you remember where we got up to in the story? Well, Jacob had tricked his brother and had run away to his uncle Laban. One night on the way he had a dream, and God promised to be near him and to bless him and to bless his family, and then also to bless all the world through this family. Today we see how God leads Jacob to be in the right place at the right time to meet Laban and Rachel. God has a plan for him. Let's watch together.
Jacob woke up feeling pretty good. He stopped to chit-chat with some local shepherds by a well. As it turned out, they knew Jacob's very own uncle Laban. Wow, Jacob thought. That's amazing. He'd found relatives on his journey who could possibly help him. Then, the shepherds told him something even more amazing. They said, "Look, here comes Laban's daughter, Rachel, right now." Jacob was stunned. Rachel was beautiful. He was in love. Jacob wanted to meet his uncle, Rachel's father, right away. He hoped he had a chance with Rachel. Laban was happy to see his nephew and offered him work and a place to stay. Life was looking up for Jacob. Laban even wanted to pay Jacob for his work. He said, "You shouldn't work for me without pay just because we're relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be." Jacob thought about this, and then he had what he thought was a brilliant idea. "I'll work for you. For 7 years, in exchange, you promise to let me marry Rachel." Laban looked at his 2 daughters, Rachel and Leah. Leah was older and should have been the one to marry first, but Jacob didn't love her. He loved Rachel. "Okay," Laban said after a bit. "I promise Rachel will be your wife." So Jacob worked hard for 7 years. After years of hard work, it was finally time for Jacob to marry Rachel. Laban threw a big party to celebrate, but that night he broke his promise and switched Leah, his older daughter, for Rachel. Jacob realized too late that he'd been tricked. Boy, was he mad. Jacob had worked for 7 years and kept his promise, only to have Laban break his promise. "Why have you deceived me?" he cried. Everything was a mess because Laban didn't keep his promise.
Oh, things don't seem to be going well for Jacob, do they? You know, kids, when life gets tough, we can complain, we can get mad, or we can trust God and wait patiently even when it doesn't seem fair. Sometimes things don't turn out as we expect, but God knows. He understands. He never stops caring for us or helping us. There is some good news.
God always keeps his promises. Remember, God promised Jacob he wouldn't leave him. The Bible tells us in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." God had made a promise to Jacob, and he stood by it. So Jacob asked Laban to be true to his promise. Laban finally said, "Okay, Rachel will be your wife in a week if you work for me for another 7 years." Jacob loved Rachel so much that he agreed, and this time, Laban kept his promise. Jacob got to marry the real Rachel this time. Jacob's story shows us that God always keeps his promises.
Jacob's family life was complicated, and he had quite a few problems over the years ahead. But God, who is loving and forgiving, was still preparing Jacob to have that large family that would be special to God. Like Jacob, we sometimes do or say wrong things. But when we say sorry, God forgives us and still works out his plan for us. Romans 8:28 says, "We know that in all things God works for the good for those who love him." What an amazing promise. God was with Jacob when he went to his uncle Laban's and met Rachel. God was with Jacob all the long years that he worked for Laban. God helped Jacob and blessed him, even when his uncle was unfair. We can keep going, even when it's hard. We can trust God. Psalm 31 verse 14. I trust in you, O Lord. You are my God. If you trust God, whatever happens, He will be with you too.